Good morning, everybody. I hope you all are doing well. Stephanie, thank you so much for going through the housekeeping rules as well. There is going to be a section at the end of the presentation where we will take questions. So I want us to be mindful of that. I know we've got a little less than an hour, so I want to just be mindful of our time and really trying to get the most out of it. But like Stephanie said, please feel free to use that chat box. Let's talk it up in there. I would love to be able to hear back from you. I'm going to do my best to track as I'm going along with this presentation. I want to say thank you first and foremost to you all for coming in this morning. It's Saturday. The weather's kind of meh right now, but I saw that we got some sunlight coming, so I know it's real easy to feel like, look, I want to get out and enjoy my weekend, my day, and I want to make sure that I give you all the opportunity to do that. But I do want to say thank you for just taking this quick hour for us to be able to have some conversation and for us to be able to learn. Stephanie and the Bird Bar Place family sent me over some information just from what people were hoping to get out of the session, and about 90 folks responded. So there was a lot to really try and condense into this one space, but I'm going to do my best, right? I will say that one of the general consensus that came from everybody's conversation, or I guess you could say a space of need, was that a lot of us are just trying to pick up the pieces after the last 3 years. We're trying to better our mental and our emotional, and I love that. And so I want to be able to do that today in this conversation. A lot of what I'm going to present outside of sharing my story is going to come from my 7th book, my latest book, The 31 Days of Power, a simplified approach to everyday mental health. And in this, I'm excited for each of you all to have a copy of it. I think it is, it'll be something that I believe we'll be able to speak to different areas. It's 31 different conversations around different elements of mental health. And I think that it's something that we all need. Like Stephanie mentioned, my name is Richard Taylor Jr. I'm here in Seattle, Washington now, originally born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. I've been in the Seattle area for the last 6 years now. But my story for me starts back home in Chicago. I'm a speaker, author. I run a company called Tailor Made Empowerment. Through that, I do consulting as well on the mental health side throughout Washington State and around the world as well. Outside of that, I also sit on the board of directors for the National Alliance on Mental Illness over on the east side, so NAMI east side over in the Renton, Bellevue area, and doing a lot of work on the mental health side. For me personally, mental health is not something, I know we got a lot of folks out here now that are jumping on the fad train of trying to talk about mental health because it seems real catchy or it's cool. That's not me. That's not my story. For me personally, mental health has been something that is obviously a part of my life for a very long time. And in that, it's the lived experience that really got me into the realm and spaces of wanting to be able to assist and help other people. So going back real quick, just a little bit about myself, the struggles started for me very early on. In 6th grade. My parents transferred me out of a private Christian school into my first public school. And I'm from Chicago. We got a heavy roasting culture, right? We will your mama you to death. And that's exactly what happened to me as soon as I came in. I was a little short, stubby kid at the time. I hadn't really hit my little growth peak yet. And so in this, I came in the first day and one of the students walks up to me, pokes me in the stomach, hoo-hoo, makes the Pillsbury Doughboy noise. We all get a good laugh. It's cool, right? And I knew how to hold my own because of the fact that this is what we had in this space, which was this roasting culture. But what I noticed probably about 5 or 6 months into that space, I was 10, 11 or years old at the time. What started off as jokes started to transition over into more malicious intent and bullying. And from there, I found myself starting to deal with these anxious feelings every day, getting ready to either go to school or come into school, wondering what it was going to be like that day. Am I going to be the butt of somebody's jokes, right? Are the bullies going to essentially make fun of me and embarrass me in front of the entire school? Whatever the case might be. And from there, I found myself in this space of sadness. Now, I want to just try and jump through some of these loopholes real quick, because I get the questions a lot around like, well, how did you deal with it when you felt yourself at this early age being this sad, this immense amount of sadness? What started to seep over into depression and anxiety? Did you seek out help? Here's the reality. I'm in a public school in the city of Chicago. We were lucky if we had a counselor or some form of mental health professional on staff. I struggled. Listen, I came from an amazing two-parent household, and while they tried their best with good intention, my parents were ill-advised when it came to the conversations around mental health. So immediately I was met with, you too young to be sad, you too young to be depressed, right? That's not, Black people can't deal with this. I also grew up in the church as well, so I was immediately shut down with the, you not praying hard enough, you're not close enough to God, right? We can go down the list of things that we've heard that can sometimes mute us in our voices in trying to be able to express where we are, even though we don't fully understand it. And so for me, this was my struggle very early on. And because of this, I stayed quiet with each and every one of these situations. And every time I tried to open up, I just gave up. And so there was one day in particular during my 6th grade year, we had just finished up recess. At the time, the Pokemon card game was the big thing for us. And so for me, I was real good in the Pokemon card game. I had just beaten my classmates in the game. And right before we go to the next class, I go to the boys' bathroom real quick. Next thing you know, I'm followed in by 10 of my bullies. They circle around me, they beat me down, and they go through my book bag, steal all my Pokemon cards. And I'm looking at the ringleader and I'm like, why are you doing this? And he says to me, people like you can't defend themselves, so we do with you as we please. That day I went home angry, crying on the school bus, mad and full of hatred, but not mad and full of hatred at them for what they had done. I was actually mad at myself for the simple fact that I couldn't protect myself, and that in some way, shape, or form, I felt like it was my fault that I was the target, that I was the victim of this. And I was on the bus that day before my parents got home from school, before my younger brother got in. I'm sorry, before my parents got home from work and my younger brother got in from school. I found myself in this space where I was like, I want to make a change. I do not want to deal with this anymore. And I said to myself, well, what if I could change the way that I look so that they would accept me and like me? And I want to be very mindful right here before I move any further with this conversation. There are going to be 2 trigger warnings I'm going to throw out in this convo. This is going to be the first, and I'll have one a few minutes later from here. But the first trigger warning piece right here, I said to myself, as I'm going through these thoughts, mind you, I'm young, I'm 10, 11 at the time. I'm not really too privy to, you talk about a fully developed brain. And I had this thought in my head where I said, well, what if I could just cut some of the fat off of my body and everything would be okay? So I went home that day and I tried to, not realizing that, of course, I wasn't losing any weight from this, but it opened the doorway to what we identify as self-mutilation. And from there, it began this cycle. Everything started to shift for me in this space where this became my muse, right? In order to somehow manage the mental and the emotional pain, I started finding myself in these predicaments where I would inflict physical pain, hoping that it would help. The next few years changed drastically for me because of the fact that I shot up in height, got to 6 feet tall. I leaned out, became a standout athlete. By the time I was in high school, freshman year, everything had started to look like it was on the up and up from the external. I'm literally in the school not just the school newspaper, the Chicago Sun-Times, the Chicago Tribune every weekend. And I'm starting to get scholarship offers galore from around the country as a freshman. And on the outside, it felt really good, right? I was no longer the target. I felt like I had become somebody. But the reality is that internally, the seeds had been sown already. And I found myself in this constant struggle where even though things were great externally, I questioned my purpose. I questioned, am I good enough? Why am I here? There were so many elements that had been laid foundationally from what I had gone through at that early space. And just because I was in this position now to where I'm highly sought after on the field and I'm very well known, it didn't take away from those internal feelings of sorrow, of sadness, and just feeling like I did not deserve or I wasn't good enough. For some of us, it comes through forms of seeking validation or maybe some early traumas as well. And this was me all the way. The first 3 years of high school, though, on the outside, things were great. But my senior year, I ended up taking a hit on the field right as I was getting ready to start making my decision on where I'd be going to play ball in college. I took a hit on the field on my blind side. I woke up in the hospital with a doctor letting me know that they ran some tests and they found out that I had what they had identified at the time as a heart murmur. And the doctor told me that my chances of playing football beyond that space were slim to none. And so for me, all of the depression, the sadness, the sorrow, it had just kind of kicked in. And a few years prior to this, going back to like my 8th grade year, I had started becoming a little more on the side of like, this isn't just trying to balance out physical and emotional pain anymore. I had found myself at times trying to take my own life. And once I got this news my senior year, it became a lot more like consistent. And in this, I was actively suicidal on a multitude of occasions, but nobody knew. I'm an extroverted extrovert. I bounce off the walls. I love everybody, and I'm everybody's cheerleader when they see me outside. But as soon as I'm by myself in those moments, I'm just like, I can't deal with this anymore. There's no way I can be two people. And so I was actively trying to end my own life. My freshman year came around of college after I found out that I wouldn't be able to play football anymore. I ended up going to Northern Illinois University. I had to go in through what was called the Chance program, essentially because of the fact that even though my in-class grades were decent, I had never been a great standardized test taker. So I took the ACT prep and took the ACT 3 times, got a 17 the first time, a 16 the second time, a 15 the third time. In this is one of the lowest scores you can potentially get on this test that's supposed to be the precursor for you getting into a university or college. And so in this, I already walked onto the campus with that feeling of being an imposter because I had to come in through a program that wasn't going to be the traditional 4 years. They let us know you're not graduating before 5 years because you got to take extra courses and this and that. And so when this happened, I immediately just kind of felt myself going in this downward spiral. I'm like, I'm on this campus. I'm in the cornfields in the middle of nowhere. I'm a city kid, y'all. So look, I wasn't used to, look, our shopping mall was Walmart, okay? You talk about taking somebody from a mall that looked like South Center back in the Chicagoland area to Walmart. I'm like, that's all I got. And so it was just the whole dynamic, the shift, the change, everything really had gotten to me at that time. And I didn't know how to really deal with it. But once again, trying to figure it out and seeking validation, my life started to spiral out of control from August of 2006 to January of 2008. During this span of about 18 months, I found myself failing in school, on academic probation 3 semesters straight, getting ready to be academically dismissed. I had gotten into a relationship, and we all adults in this space, we know how it is. Sometimes when we find ourselves in spaces of desperation, it can be very, very easy for us to open ourselves up to things that we typically wouldn't, but in this space, it's given us something in the moment. And that was me. I got into this relationship and I did not realize that in my pursuit of trying to feel validated in this space, I ended up becoming the victim of domestic abuse for that next year and a half. And then from August of 2006 to January of 2008, I was no longer in mom and dad's house anymore. There wasn't a lock on the fridge, and I ate myself into oblivion. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I walked on campus at 200 pounds. 18 months later, I was 370 pounds, and I found myself dealing with a multitude of physical ailments because of it, right? So Dr. King Day of 2008 was celebrated on January 21st that year. That day, my life, I had my pivot moment. It changed forever. I'm not going to go into the details, but I will give a quick trigger warning. This is our final one. I'm going back and forth with my ex-girlfriend at the time. There were some situations that came up. We lived in the same college dorm hall on the same floor. We got into an argument. I had just finished washing the dishes, and one thing led to another. I found out a bunch of information that really shattered my heart, my mold. And in this, we go back and forth. I remember the last words before I blacked out. I said, if you don't give a care about me and nobody else gives a care about me, then why should I care about myself? I took the first object I could find from what I had from those dishes. Trigger warning right here. It was a blade, and I went down my wrist 5 times where the word love is now tattooed on my arm. And in this, I blacked out. I woke up in a hospital with a doctor cleaning me up, stitching me up, letting me know, Mr. Taylor, you tapped the main vessel at the top of your wrist, but no blood would come out. his next words to me were, you got a purpose in life and you need to figure out what it is. Little did this doctor know that purpose was the very thing that I had struggled with for so long. So I had to sleep on it. I didn't really know what to make of it, but I slept on it. The next morning, I wake up, the school newspaper is sitting right there in the hospital in the bins where they drop the newspapers in the morning. And my story is in there in the police beat. This really messed me up because of the fact that I wasn't just some person on campus who had done this that nobody knew. I was highly active on campus because I tried to use positions, label, title, and being an active student to hide and cover up everything that I had dealt with internally. So I was the president of a fraternity. I was one of I was a vice president for my school's gospel choir. I worked on the campus activity board, student government, and I worked at the front desk in the residence hall. I was highly known, and I said to myself, there is no way that I could go back on this campus with this story being out here in the paper and circulating around social media. And I made it up in my mind that I was either going to do this again and succeed or drop out, go back home to Chicago and become another statistic. That day, I just so happened to get a call from a gentleman who became my first mentor later on in life, but he reached out to me. He was a part of a student access program. He had seen me around campus and he reached out and he was like, Richard, listen, I know I don't know you and you don't know me, but you made a mistake and this does not have to be the end of your life. I didn't have anything to lose. He offered an opportunity to be a part of this mentoring program. And I told him where I was. I'm like, I'm failing in school. I took gym class already. I took CPR. I'm in all of my 300 level courses now, right? I'm taking classes that if I do not make it, I am out of here. He put me around the right tutors, the right mentors, and he even got me connected with our school's counseling department. And from that, this was the start of the shift for me when it came to trying to figure out where or what I could be. It was not easy. There was a host of sleepless nights, a lot of tears, and a lot of investment in even wondering if it was all worth it at that point. But what I will say is this: by the spring, the end of the spring semester of 2008, little by little, I started to see changes. The first change that I saw was the fact that throughout that semester, I was able, through the tutoring, I was able to get a 4.0 on the semester, which boosted me up enough to get me off of academic probation. And it led me to this one thought. It said, if I can do this in this one area of my life, then maybe I could do it in others. And I started getting serious about the therapy piece. I wasn't fighting my counselor anymore, trying to come in and self-diagnosing or just saying I'm not crazy. I really had to get to the nitty-gritty and open up and talk about my problems and my issues. And that was highly beneficial. And then from there, it became a piece of working on the physical weight until the point where now here we are, 15 years later, and I've lost all the weight that I've gained and really trying to lead and live a healthier lifestyle because the mind and the body are connected more than we know. That is a little bit about myself, and I appreciate you all for listening to me. I want to jump into this quick presentation, and then I'm gonna get out your hair so we can open up the floor for some Q&A. I titled today's talk, where do we go from here? It's something that I've been thinking about. And I thought about this title too for us because of the fact that as the survey was asked around, what people want to take away, I think at the end of the day, it is, where do I go from here? No matter what you've experienced or where you are, I think we're trying to figure out not only next steps, but we want to be able to solidify and to better our mental and our emotional. And I hope we can get a chance to do that today. So I want to jump straight into this, right? Let's break the stigma of mental health together. First piece takeaway that I want to give you all, it comes from the first chapter of the 31 Days of Power book. That chapter is called We All Have Mental Health. Right? We all have mental health, and our mental health deserves a proactive approach so that we can minimize moments that we react when it's too late, right? Why am I saying react when it's too late? I don't know if you all notice or not, but we lost DJ Twitch. We've lost individuals that might be celebrities or folks that we know or in the space. And a lot of times what we tend to see is this, I wish I could have done something. I wish I could have known. And so my big push is usually, how can we learn to be proactive rather than reactive, right? Catching it on the front end, being there on the front end, being intentional with our people. But the we all have a mental health piece is very important to me. And here's why. Just like our physical health exists, so does our mental. I remember when I first presented on this idea before this was ever a book. The We All Have a Mental Health piece actually came up from an event that I did back in the spring of 2018. I was the keynote speaker for a group of psychologists on the East Coast, and we were in the Q&A session. I don't know why, but part of my answer was, oh, that makes sense. We all have a mental health. Literally within the span of about 10 seconds, one woman hops up, big energy. I ain't got no mental health issues. And it was like one of those moments where like, I was like, man, like, that's so Raven. I felt like I could see like the Will Smith, Chris Rock thing happen as she was going off. And I'm like, how do I hurry up and diffuse the situation? So I had to break it down to her like this. I said, listen, I'm not saying that we have mental health issues. I'm simply saying that we all have a mental health. We all have a brain. We all have emotions that are just like our physical body, right? And what happens when we are not taking care of ourselves physically with our brain, when we're not investing into it, whether now or in the future, we can see issues arise. So it's not to say that you have a mental health struggle right now or a mental health issue or a diagnosis. It's simply to say that you have a mental as a whole that deserves your proactive investment rather than your reactive investment. But I'd be, remiss if I didn't go back real quick. And I want to make sure that we talk about this because it's very easy to start separating and segregating folks when we talk about mental health issues. If you are a person that struggles, if you are an individual that has been diagnosed, I just want you to know, issue or not, listen, your life still has a great purpose, even with the issue. If you've been diagnosed, I need for you to know that you are more than the sum of your diagnosis. If you are somebody that struggles mentally, it does not make you any less than the person who doesn't. And here's why. If the last 3 years haven't taught us anything, it has taught us that all it takes is one bad situation, one wrong move, one of us being let go from a job and we're trying to provide for our family, whatever it might be. And in an instant, we can find ourselves, if we are vulnerable and susceptible in a moment, we can find ourselves in a struggle and dealing with issues that we never thought that we would have. So for those of you all that are individuals that struggle with your mental health, please know that you are more than the sum of a diagnosis. You might struggle with it, but it does not own you. Your life still has purpose. You are still worthy. You are still valuable, and you can still do great things, right? I know it's very hard for us sometimes to, however, believe that though, because of the fact that we see ourselves in the struggle. And I'm just here to let you know that you're not. We all have a mental health, and I want us to be mindful of taking the time to invest into it. Here's the bottom line with this piece. Having a mental health is not a bad thing. Your mind is beautiful, and I personally believe it should be treated as such, right? As we move on, I want to talk real quickly about anxiety that has been caused by our life experiences, and not just over the last 3 years, but life as a whole, right? Here's the truth. Whenever we are entering uncharted territory, it is easy for us to become anxious, to feel lost, or to feel like we're falling behind. I personally believe that you're not, but I want to talk about ways that we can combat anxious thoughts and feelings. 2 things I want to give you all real quick. The first is this idea of us being able to fact check our thoughts, right? And here's why, right? We got to remember that not every thought that we have, every intrusive thought or overwhelming thought is signaling a legitimate reason to worry. Now, yes, life be life, and I get it, right? Life is happening, things are happening, and in this, we are thinking, but in the thoughts that we have, right, in the fears that we have, in those moments where we are making a deposit into something that could or couldn't happen, what we've got to realize is that that's not necessarily fact in the moment. And so I think in us being able to check our thinking in that time, it can help us. And I want to double down on this with this second idea, which is how can we start to begin to relabel our thinking as we are reconnecting in the world and life and with ourselves, maybe some of us for the first time. Here's the reality. Fight or flight feelings can fool us into overreacting by responding unfavorably to what's really happening as we navigate our way back into community, back into life, and back into this fold. So with our facts, the reason why I think it's important for us to fact check is because it will help us to relabel our thoughts. Here's the reality. When we talk about fact checking, one of the things that we tend to happen is that thoughts can lead to feelings. But I think in the moments where feelings are high, we easily forget how fickle feelings are. right? And so this is why I'm saying we got to fact check our thoughts, because our feelings can legitimately be lying to us in a moment that will cause us to respond unfavorably. So if we know that we're dealing with feelings, can we take the time to just pause for a second and start to go one by one with what we feel and meet it where it is? Take the time to look over it, to really internalize it and ask the question, is this true about me? Or is this something that I'm feeling in the moment that's been produced by whatever circumstance that I find myself going through? And then after that, I want us to take time to relabel our thinking. Why am I saying this? A lot of times it's easy for us to go through life and we might look at something as a loss, right? And maybe it wasn't really a loss. Maybe it was a lesson. I think that a lot of times we give anxiety a little more power and strength than it actually deserves, because of the fact that we have placed labels on certain things that aren't necessarily true, or we've placed labels on things that could use a better label in how we choose to look at it and move forward. So with that being said, I want to leave you with these two thoughts for this particular part of the conversation. Please don't forget who's in control, right? Uncertainty during times of transition is very normal, right? But just because you can't control yourself, I am a firm believer that even when we can't control ourselves, we have the power to, even though we can't control the situation, we have the power to control ourselves, right? Before we act, before we make judgment to do certain things, we can control that side. We might not be able to control the space around us, but I do believe that we can control ourselves and learn to control ourselves, our responses, before we move forward, right? The next piece that I want to give us is going to come around this idea from the 31 Days of Power, which talks about the power of community for our mental health, right? So embracing the power of community for your mental, right? Studies have shown that we as humans are relational beings, and we actually benefit from having at least one meaningful connection each day. And so I want us, listen, maybe you've grown up in a space where that wasn't your thing, where you didn't talk to people, or maybe you got a circle of folks around you, but you haven't been intentional. I know for me personally, I have done this time and time again, and it's something that I've vowed to get better at over the last 10 years of I need to be able to let my community in. I don't want us to feel like we have to fight this battle alone, or we have to go through this journey and process of life alone. That is not the case, right? I believe that when we are intentional with our community, we can find help in areas that we need it in the most, right? And so here we go. I want to jump into this. I really want to encourage us to lean in deeper with our community. Two things that I want us to do when I talk about leaning in. The first is, can we learn to be specific with our people about what we need, right? A lot of times we are only kind of giving clues, or sometimes we are kind of giving a general overview, but we're not necessarily always being specific. And I want to encourage us to do that. And then I want to double down with the second thought, which is, can we take the time to be honest with our people, right? Truth be told, we cannot heal on half truths. And sometimes we are connected to people, and we might be connected to them out of comfort, or we might be connected to them because we share some same interests or commonalities. But the reality is that we spend time with folks and we're not really letting them into the depth to say, this is where I am. These are my struggles. I need help with this. I've been carrying this weight. And then this is how sometimes we end up finding ourselves going into those situations where we are like, I wish I would have known this about my friend. God forbid it's an unfortunate suicide, or it was an almost, right? Like we want then to know, like, man, like I wish they would have said something, or I wish I would have said something. So I do want to encourage us to lean in deeper with them, right? Be direct, ask questions, right? What you've got to understand, if you are an individual that maybe you have struggled opening up with community, you are not weak for admitting that you might be in a season of struggle and that you need help balancing everything that you're carrying, right? That does not make you a weak individual. It doesn't make you less than of a person. It simply means that you're human, and there's actually more strength in being able to open up to get the help than staying quiet. And I want to encourage that. As we move forward, from the power of community, I want us to just look at ourselves when it comes to our personal identity and our mental health, with this idea of where do we go from here. A big part of our where do we go from here is going to be our identity and who we are, right? I want us to embrace the opportunity to learn who we've become and how we've changed over the last 3 years. I can't see your faces right now, but I'm pretty sure y'all can be honest in the chat box. The you that you are now in March of 2023 is not the you that you were literally in March of 2020, as we were all getting ready to go into some form of hibernation, right? You've learned more about yourself, maybe good, bad, indifferent. You've gotten an opportunity to see things. If you're anything like me, maybe you've gone through loss. I've had family members that I wasn't able to say goodbye to, whether passing by COVID or something else, right? And it's changed and it shifted us, right? There have been so many things that have essentially moved us out of that realm. And here's something that I want you to consider on a rhetorical side, and it's this: through the changes of the last 3 years, we have changed as well. I want you to start to consider, who are you now in this moment, right? Your identity in this space. What are your likes and your dislikes? What are your triggers? What are the things that set you off? What are the things that make you happy? Like, we've got to be able to really dive into this. And the reason why I'm saying this is because whether we notice it or not, we went through a lot, and for many of us, we just kept sweeping it under the rug. We kept moving. We had to figure it out in the moment. And in this, we had this buildup that we never got a chance to fully deal with. And so I want us to take some time to consider our identity. But from a community standpoint, I want us to consider as individuals for ourselves, but then also as individuals for those that we get a chance to be around and serve. How can we help? Two things I think are massively important. The first is, can we take the limits off and get creative on our approaches to helping our people? This can come through the form of, instead of waiting for somebody to create or give you a seat at the table, start to create a table. Whether that table looks like an opportunity to create some group conversation around mental health, a support group for women, for men, non-binary, doesn't matter. Like, taking the time to legitimately get creative when it comes to taking our limits off of how we would traditionally do things, because we can see that that hasn't necessarily been the most effective way to go about it, right? So how can we start to get creative? For some of you all, it might be with your children. It might be, how can I get to talk to my kids and help them with their mental health, right? Meet them where they are, right? We've got to become very creative in our thinking. And I can't tell you what that looks like, but I can encourage the creativity. With that, I want to double down, and I also want to encourage us to not be afraid to be direct, to ask direct questions, right? I know for a long time in the mental health field, it used to be this whole piece of like, you don't want to ask anything too specific because it could trigger the person into it. What we're starting to see now is that that's not the case. Many mental health professionals are actually starting to encourage the opposite, right? When you see something, say something, right? And it doesn't even have to be a thing of like, hey, are you considering suicide? It could be something as simple as, look, I noticed that your patterns are changing. You're not eating as much, or you're eating more, or you're not sleeping as much, or you're sleeping more, or you seem detached from community, right? We've got to be specific, and we've got to be direct and asking the questions that I believe will help us, but then also help those that we are with as well. We've got to remember that our current circumstance is only temporary. I know it's crazy. I do a lot of work around the country with high school and college age students, right? And I know that as we are younger, it's very easy in those times to feel like problems that arise will last forever. But the reality is that we realize that they don't. Circumstances then are not the circumstances that we're dealing with now. And so in this, I want us to be reminded of this too, because it's not just a thing with youth. It's us when we find ourselves in circumstances now thinking that it's going to last forever. And with that being said, I actually want to go back to an earlier book that I wrote. There was a chapter in there called There Is Hope. Here's my thought process around this. Even though many of our recent experiences have given us an opportunity to feel hopeless, I just want us to know that hope still exists. But what if we need to reframe our perspective on hope? Hope is really interesting. I'm gonna let y'all in on a secret that more and more people are finding out about me as they start to like follow me on social media or whatever the case might be. I love the holiday season, specifically Christmas, okay? I just took my Christmas tree down a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, two solid, legitimate weeks ago. It was 2 Saturdays ago, I took my Christmas tree down. Richard, why is this a conversation of hope right now? Just bear with me real quick. It's all gonna make sense in a moment. With me, hope is really interesting around the holiday season, not just because of the music, but because of the movies. It started off with classics that we know, like Home Alone, Elf. We could go down the list of all the other ones, the original Miracle on 34th Street, A Christmas Story, yada, yada, yada. Something shifted for me, though, about 7 years ago. For whatever reason, and cheesy as it might be, I found myself falling in love with Hallmark, the Hallmark Channel and Lifetime Christmas movies, Hallmark specifically, though. I started to notice this pattern because I wasn't just watching Hallmark movies during the holiday season anymore. I downloaded the app and I started watching it year round, right? They got some good stuff. They bring in a lot of like B and C list actors from my childhood back. I love it, right? But in this, what I noticed is that Hallmark does a really good job of creating these storylines, albeit the same almost every time. But they do a really good job of creating these stories that give us some kind of feeling of hope at the end of it, right? And it's typically the same old guy, girl from the big city, whatever the case might be, used to be from a small town, got to go back to the small town to do some work for their job, to also save the town. That might be mom and dad's business or a staple in the community. I got to go back home so I can get this raise and do the best so I can live my best life. And we go through this space where they get there and they run into usually the either somebody that they've known, it was a fling that didn't fling, or it's some new person, but this is the bad person of the movie. They're the villain because you did me wrong in high school, or you doing me wrong right now because you tearing my town down, right? And so in this, for the first hour and 15 minutes, they at each other's throats. We go to commercial break, we come back, and all of a sudden, brush of a shoulder, gaze of an eye, I kind of like you, like, even though I hate you. And next thing you know, the next 45 minutes, they go through this whole piece where I'm falling in love with you. By the end of the movie, 45 minutes later, boom, 90-day fiance, we getting married in 3 days. This is every storyline in almost every Hallmark movie. And in this, I find myself feeling some sense of hope around it. Like, oh, wow, like that's great. I love love, right? And so in this, I noticed that it is very easy for us to see things like this and to feel hope in one big aha moment. Let's shift over to sports real quick. You could look at the walk-off grand slam home run in baseball. You could look at a game-winning shot in basketball, a game-winning touchdown in the sport of football. And it's easy for us to feel hopeful in that one big moment. But hear me, what if that is not hope? What if hope isn't that? What if hope is actually small baby steps done right over a consistent period of time? What if hope in baseball is a run batted in to just get you to the next base and not the walk-off grand slam? What if hope is a game-tying field goal and not the touchdown? What if it's 2 free throws that will tie you up to push you into overtime and give you extended periods to find the victory and to find the win? In the Hallmark movies, what if what if all that other stuff actually does happen, but instead of jumping into the 90-day fiance at the end of the movie, what if they just take some time to ask some serious questions like, hey, how's your credit? How's your relationship like with your family? Do you deal with your traumas? Do you have children around the world that nobody knows about, right? Like simple things. What if we're taking time to invest into the small steps and finding hope piece by piece within that? And I think this is really important because I know a lot of times we carry expectations, and when those expectations aren't met, definitely during tough seasons, it's easy for us mentally to start going down the deep end and feeling hopeless. What if, and I'm closing up after this, what if hope is you? What if you are a symbol of hope, considering the fact that over the last 3 years, you've dealt with so much and you're still here? Are you your best self? Probably not. None of us are, but you're here. In moments and times where maybe you had the opportunity not to be, you're here. What if hope exists because you do? I just want us to be reminded that there is hope. But in this, I want us to reframe our hope. I want us to reframe our perspective and to look at it and say, maybe it's the little things that I've done that have led me up to this space, and hope exists because of that. So with that being said, I want you to be reminded that your best days are ahead of you. But it's okay to embrace humble expectations in the moment that will lead you to the greater picture of hope. For anybody struggling in this space right now, I want you to know that your life is worth living, even through the hardest of times. So when we talk about where do we go from here, it gets hard. Life is still worth living. You are not alone. Everyone is trying to figure it out. Please don't be afraid to reach out for support. You deserve community, and community is here for you. Finally, I want us to make space for grace. It's the last chapter in the 31 Days of Power book, where I talk about this idea of grace, pace, and power. For many of us, it's easy for us to show and treat others with so much love, regard, kindness, and grace, but we struggle to do it for ourselves. And we get down on ourselves. And in that, it's easy for us to start feeling like, you know what? Maybe it's not worth it. I'm throwing my hands up. For some of us, it's not even a personal thing with us. For some of you all in this space, your parents, and it's you not being able to show grace in how you have tried to navigate the realm as a parent. For some of you, it's navigating the realm of being a spouse or a partner or whatever the case might be. For some of you, it's you on your job. I just want you to take a pause and to show yourself grace in those moments where you need it, in those moments where your response wasn't what you expected it to be or hoped it would be, or your best practice didn't work in the way that you thought it would in that time. Please make space for grace. And then finally, I just want to leave you all with this one thought. It comes from an earlier book. I use this all the time. It's a simple quote that says, you're not losing in life, you're not failing, you're simply between the dream. What is between the dream? It's not just the title of my book or my podcast. It's a way of life for me. Between the dream is the point between your present moment and your promise. I like to call that area in the middle the process. Between the dream is the process. I'm a firm believer that when we embrace our process, we can embrace our progress. And as we embrace our progress, we can walk into every promise, purpose, and plan that is meant for our lives. So with that being said, family, thank you all for joining today. And I want you to be reminded, as we talk about where do we go from here, it is a process. But you're not losing in life, you're not failing, you're simply between the dream and that process. Please, let's make sure to remember to be proactive rather than reactive with our mental. Let's open up to community. Let's make sure that we are internalizing and spending time with ourselves so that we can better learn ourselves. And let's make sure that in all of our expectations that we have and the things that we want to do, hope exists. But let's take time to reframe hope and start finding it in those small areas that maybe we've overlooked. With that being said, I just want to say thank you all. Here's my info on the screen, and I want to open the floor for any questions that we might have at this time. Thank you so much for your time.